I played every Dragon Ball Xenoverse game. Here's my thoughts. Dragon Ball Xenoverse is a series of 3D fighting games that are sort of similar to the Budokai Tenkaichi or Raging Blast games. I know you're probably wondering, Neosai, there's only 2 Xenoverse games. Well, I was originally gonna wait to make this video when there was an eventual Xenoverse 3, but that's looking like it's not gonna happen anytime soon at this rate. But there is an extra game that I'm going to cover here that actually precedes the Xenoverse games and established a lot of the concepts that we see in them. Plus, with Dragon Ball The Breakers coming out soon, and confirmed to be a Xenoverse related game, what better time is there than to play the Xenoverse games anyways? Before I get into it though, I really want to thank my absolutely awesome patrons, including Melancholis in the Omega Gamer tier, Megcub Solohan, and That's Just Ash in the Played Every Game tier, and all of the wonderful people that you see on your screen here. Thank you so much for your support. Alright, let's get into the games. Dragon Ball Xenoverse was released for consoles and PC in 2015. This game is sort of a spiritual successor to the Budokai Tenkaichi games, at least in the gameplay style, but there's definitely a lot more to see here. Visually, this game has a pretty interesting style. It's got this anime cel-shaded look for the characters, albeit a bit toned down from something like the first Raging Blast game, but the actual environments and backgrounds have this interesting almost watercolor or pastel look to them. It honestly works really well in my opinion because the characters contrast with the environment, but not so much that they look like they're from 2 separate games. I really like this look overall, and I think my only complaint is that some of the textures here seem a bit low res, but you don't really notice it in motion. This game has standard in-engine 3D cutscenes, which look fine, albeit a little bit janky sometimes, but also fully animated 2D cutscenes. I really love seeing scenes like this because it's a cool way of making the player feel like they're inside an episode of Dragon Ball, well, to an extent. Of course, since you create your character in this game, they never actually show up in the scenes, but I mean, that makes sense. I'll talk more about the scenes a little bit more later on though. While I'm covering presentation, I just have to say, the music in both of the Xenoverse games is top tier. There's a wide range of absolute bops, ranging from heavy metal to lighthearted, almost jazz-like songs. This isn't something I see talked about too much when people discuss these games, but man, this music is really great. The gameplay in Xenoverse is kind of broken up into 2 different segments. There's the hub exploration and the battle gameplay. I'll talk about the hub exploration in a little bit. First, let's talk about battling. Battling in these games takes place in big 3D arenas, and it can either be one-on-one or big fights with multiple characters on both sides. You can move around freely in any direction, though there are invisible stage borders if you move far enough out or high enough. In combat, the controls are pretty straightforward. You can do fast attacks with one button and heavy attacks with another. Both of these can be mixed together to make combos. Heavy attacks can also be charged up and used to break through guards. You also have special attacks like Ki blasts and rush moves. Ki can be charged just by fighting or by equipping a move that specifically allows you to charge it. You can then use the moves by holding the right trigger on whatever controller you're using and hitting the face buttons that you've assigned your moves to. You can see ultimate moves, stamina moves, and transformations by holding both triggers at the same time. Speaking of stamina, you also have a stamina bar, and this refills over time when you're not actively fighting. Stamina is used for a couple of things, including the burst rush, which lets you fly quickly, and vanishing to escape a combo or other special move. If you run out of stamina, you basically have to wait until it recharges all the way before you can do any kind of moves like guarding again. I think my biggest complaint about this combat system is that it sometimes feels kind of clunky. Say you're using a strong attack to send the enemy hurtling into the earth, just straight down. Yeah, it felt really cool, but now you awkwardly have to click in the left stick to change your height so you can actually continue fighting. I know this is really just a nitpick, but it happened enough that it became super frustrating. While this game does have a pretty big roster, the story mode is primarily played with a custom character that you create when you start the game. You can choose from Earthlings, Saiyans, Namekians, Majins, and Frieza's race. Every race has its own race-specific stat advantages and disadvantages. I'm boring and wanted the ability to be a Super Saiyan, so I picked Saiyan in both games. And for the record, you unlock standard characters and their variations through playing the story mode and parallel quests, which I'll get to. Accessing most of the modes in this game isn't actually done through a traditional menu. Instead, you have to physically navigate the hub area called Toki Toki City to get to the mode that you want to play. The city is broken up into 3 distinct sectors: the Industrial Sector, the Time Machine Station, and the Plaza of Time. In the Industrial Sector, you can find all the shops, including the Item Shop, Skill Shop, Clothing Shop, and Accessory Shop. All the shops are run by little robots, by the way. At the Time Machine Station, you can find the Parallel Quests booth and the Battle booth, which allows for offline battles and online battles. I'll touch on those a little bit later, probably when I talk about Xenoverse 2. Finally, in the Plaza of Time, you can find the tournament registration area and, most importantly, the gateway navigate to the Time Nest, which is where you go to complete story missions. Something I really like about Toki Toki City that I don't know how to convey in this video is its dynamic music. There's this upbeat song that plays when you're running around, and it changes slightly depending on where you are. If you head to the shops, all of them have these additional little percussion sounds that mesh into the song, whereas heading into the Time Nest removes the percussion track entirely. It's a subtle little detail, but it's one that makes everywhere you go feel distinct, even when it's all just using one song. If you played Super Mario Sunshine, it's the same concept as when you jump on a Yoshi. The shops in this game sell various items, accessories, clothing, and skills. The items are consumables which you can equip to your character to replenish HP, stamina, ki, and even revive yourself if you're in like a group mission or parallel quest. Accessories are visual items, usually headgear, but also stuff like swords. Of course, I had to put on the obnoxious World Tournament announcer glasses because look at that drip! Oh, and before I forget, some gear is only available for certain races. That means that a Saiyan character can't equip Majin or Namekian gear, for example. The actual equipment here includes various clothes, and all of them have different stats. For the most part, you can recolor any of the gear however you want, but there are some pieces of gear that aren't able to be recolored for some unknown reason. I actually do have a complaint about the gear system in this game, though. In this game, all shirts, pants, shoes, gloves, etc. are tied to stats. This means that you essentially have to choose whether or not you want to look cool or be strong. Most of the cool-looking gear, in my opinion, has terrible stats, or at the very least, a massive stat debuff trade-off that would put you at a huge disadvantage depending on your build. I get that it's more of an MMO thing, but I do wish you were able to put on whatever you wanted, but keep the stats of another item as long as you bought them both. Xenoverse 2 kind of sorta has a solution for this, but we'll get into that later. Also, before I forget this too, you can log into the lobby as either a single-player lobby or a multiplayer lobby. In the single-player lobby and multiplayer lobby, a bunch of AI characters will inhabit Toki Toki City to make it more lively. Online, the AI are still there, but you'll also see players running around in real time. There's canned chat options and some built-in emotes that you can do to interact, but there's not much beyond that. As for the AI characters, usually you can talk to them and sometimes they'll just have a little dialogue blurb, while other times they'll do something like give you an item. Some even have parallel quests to offer that don't normally show up in the parallel quest menu. One last little thing about the hub is that in the hub area, sometimes you'll find these little items just scattered about everywhere. It's usually nothing crazy, but still it gives you this little bit of incentive to actually explore the hub area rather than just beelining from place to place. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this when I was talking about equipment, but there is one other kind of gear that you can equip called Z-Souls. These are items that activate themselves during battles depending on various requirements. The default one for my character activates when I get low HP and it triggers a minor HP regeneration buff, but only once per battle. Other Z-Souls do things like buff specific moves or debuff enemies under certain conditions. Another kind of shop in this game is the mix shop. In order to use the mix shop, you first have to either buy or acquire items that can be used in the mixing process. Then you pretty much just fuse them together in the mix shop to get a new item. Mixing can be kind of expensive though, especially for the higher level items, since you sometimes have to buy the ingredients and you actually have to pay for the mixing process itself. A lot of these items are seemingly only available through mixing though. Let's talk about the story mode. Well, it's less of a story mode and more of an ever-present story option. Either way, in order to progress the story, you have to talk to Trunks inside the Time Nest. You're then taken out of the hub area and into a linear storyline. After every mission, you have the option to leave and return to the Time Nest to explore, boost your stats, shop, or take on parallel quests. Or you can just continue the story. Speaking of boosting stats, as you play story missions and parallel quests, you level up your custom character by earning experience. When you level up, you're granted experience points that you can allocate to your stats to increase them as you see fit. It's pretty cool watching your character grow in real time by looking at this little stat graph as it widens. I'm mainly focused on my brute strength, but you can upgrade your character however you want. Of course, your gear will still affect your stats, but you can counteract that a little bit by allocating points in places that your gear might weaken, especially if it's a super nice piece of gear otherwise. The actual story here is one of my favorite things about the Xenoverse games. In this game, you play as a time patroller summoned by Shenron on behalf of a wish made by Trunks. Your goal is to help Trunks restore the timeline while the villains, Towa and Mira, go out of their way to mess everything up for nefarious reasons. Oh, and also this guy, I guess. I mean, this really is just an excuse to retell the entire Dragon Ball story again, but it's done with a twist that actually makes it feel fresh. Your character gets involved in all the big fights. Well, all the big fights starting with Raditz, but still, sometimes stuff happens out of order and there will be some minor differences. Here's an example. When you're helping the Z-Fighters take on the Ginyu Force, it's actually you who ends up switching bodies with Captain Ginyu, which is a hilarious twist on the original story. Or how about the time that Hercule gets an immense power-up and the ability to fly and go toe-to-toe with a Saiyan while Gohan fights Cell? Obviously, to fully appreciate appreciate this game, you definitely have to be at least somewhat familiar with the events of Dragon Ball Z. This game pretty much assumes that you know broadly what happens and in what order. Sometimes Trunks or the Supreme Kai of Time will verbally explain what's going on or what's supposed to happen, but the onus is mostly on the player to understand. That being said, I could still see someone who isn't a hardcore fan still enjoying the story mode either way. And I did mention that I'd mention the cutscenes again. Look, these scenes aren't numerous, but just having these high quality 2D animated scenes makes the game experience so much better. It's so much more fun to get invested in the story when the scenes could jump over to 2D at any point. It kind of keeps you on your toes. Outside of these cutscenes, a lot of the storytelling in this game is done during the fights, actually. When you're fighting enemies, you'll hear fully voiced dialogue the whole way through. You usually have Trunks and the Supreme Kai of Time in your ear, but you also see dialogue from the people involved in the fight too. I really like this method of storytelling because just watching a static cutscene full of people standing around is a lot less excited than beating the snot out of someone while they ran about how much stronger they are. Let's move on to parallel quests. Outside of the standard quests, there's also an entirely distinct secondary set of quests called parallel quests. While these are technically optional, they're definitely necessary if you don't want to be underleveled in the story missions. Parallel quests are a series of little themed mini-quests that cover both content not seen in the main story and fun what-if stuff sometimes too. Some of them are just extra fights against big baddies, while others are quests that straight up put you on the side of the villains. When you select a quest that you want to do, you also select the character that you want to use in the quest and 2 characters to be in your party. You can also play these quests online with real players too. Parallel quests also have these little extra objectives, at least that's the best way I can explain it. When you go into a parallel quest, you're usually immediately put into a fight. Once you win the fight though, the quest won't always end. Sometimes there are these portals that will open, or an enemy or a new ally will show up and you'll have to do a whole new fight, or there'll just be this small exploration segment where you're looking for items using a scouter. As you go through the quests though, whenever extra enemies show up, usually that means there's extra requirements that you can fill to get something called an ultimate finish. Again, this is usually an additional enemy or set of enemies that you have to fight, and they're usually way stronger than the standard enemies. Beating these extra requirements gives you extra money and rewards, but it's not always 100% necessary, and just clearing the standard quest is usually enough. Speaking of rewards, every parallel quest has guaranteed rewards, but also rewards that you have a chance at getting. While this is cool in theory, it can lead to grinding if there's a specific item you want from a quest. One thing I want to mention before I forget, by the way, are the mentors. As you progress through the story, characters will start appearing in the hub area and will ask to be your mentor. This includes a bunch of characters, including Goku, Vegeta, Krillin, Piccolo, Captain Ginyu, Cell, and even Hercule. Once you've found a mentor that you want, you can then do missions that are these mini fights against them where you learn one of their signature moves. Then, once you've beaten that fight, you have to go and use their move a bunch of times in other fights. Eventually, after doing this enough, they'll teach you a new move. Then it's rinse and repeat the same process again. While I'm not entirely sure how it works, I believe that a secondary way of unlocking more mentor quests is to bring the mentor along with you on missions to raise your friendship. You can also only have one mentor at a time, and while you have that mentor, they actually have little flavored dialogue lines when you complete missions. I haven't mentioned this yet, but after every mission you complete, you're given a breakdown of all your feats and a letter ranking from D all the way up to Z, which is the best rank. Depending on your rank, your mentor will either congratulate you or just make you feel awful. So I know that I haven't covered everything that you can do in this game, but there are a couple of modes that I either couldn't play because no one was online, or they're modes that are in Xenoverse 2, and I'll talk about them there. Also, Xenoverse 2 pretty much supersedes this game in a number of ways, and hopefully that'll make more sense later on in the video. Anyways, the first Xenoverse is a good game. I enjoyed the time I spent with it, and while there are some clunky elements that are especially more pronounced and noticeable after having played Xenoverse 2, this game is still a wonderful foundation for the future of hopefully a series. The gameplay mechanics feel a lot like the stuff we saw in the Tenkaichi and Raging Blast games, but the added level of customization just makes it a better overall experience. Still, I wouldn't go out of my way to suggest buying this game, but again, hopefully that makes sense after I talk about Xenoverse 2. Speaking of, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 was released on the PC and consoles in 2016, with an updated release for the Nintendo Switch in 2017. There's also a free light trial version on the PS4 and Xbox One with more limited features and characters. This game looks incredibly similar to Xenoverse 1 at first glance, but it definitely has some differences, especially in all the extra features. Right off the bat, the gameplay feels more smooth to me. The combat is faster, the moves feel like they connect better, and I actually feel more in control of my character. The actual gameplay mechanics are basically the same though, just refined. Visually, this is very similar to Xenoverse 1, but there are some clear upgrades in lighting and effects, especially in the special moves and ki blasts. The most noticeable change for me, right off the bat, was how moves like the Kamehameha are significantly more detailed with new little outside texture effects. The actual auras like Super Saiyan auras look better to me too. I also wanted to talk about the animations here. In Xenoverse 1, the cutscenes were either static scenes of characters standing around or fully animated cutscenes in 2D. Here, it's about the same, and both of those things are still here, but there's now these beautiful 3D pre-rendered cutscenes that remind me heavily of the kind of stuff that you'd see in the Naruto Storm games. They're very detailed and expressive, and honestly, some of my favorite scenes out of any Dragon Ball game I've played before. There's something about how they're stylized too. It's got this cinematic feel that I can't really think of the words to describe. Though in the PC version, I did have some issues with some cutscenes where the characters would randomly disappear, teleport, and bob their heads for no reason. As funny as it definitely was distracting sometimes, and I couldn't find a fix for it. I never had this issue with the PS4 version that I played a few years ago though. As for the gameplay, there's a couple of specific changes and tweaks that I want to note. For starters, the gameplay feels like it's been, I don't know, sped up a bit, or at least smoothed out. The combos feel less clunky, there's new movement mechanics like a rush charge move, and your default combos actually chase the opponents rather than forcing you to awkwardly change elevations repeatedly. It still happens sometimes, but it's not as prevalent as it was in the first game. This game is more about rush charges than just punching, move forward, punch, move forward, rinse and repeat. Another big change, and probably the biggest change here, is the hub area. It's canonically the same place, but it's now called Kanton City. Instead of being broken up into 3 distinct districts, this area is now one hub area. To facilitate travel, you're actually able to fly around freely. Well, once you've unlocked flying, which is a little ways into completing the story. In order to facilitate quicker travel, they added a secondary traversal system in these little hoverboards that they call vehicles. You can unlock a couple of these through various means in the game. I really don't get why these are here though, because it doesn't really take a super long time to unlock flight, which is by far the easiest and fastest way to get around. There's also these little fast travel robots you can use too, but I found myself mostly just flying around everywhere. So with a bigger hub area comes an expansion to many of the modes and systems we saw in the first game. The main story quests are done in the same way as the last game. You go through a gateway to the time nest and talk to an NPC in there to begin. Parallel quests, shops, and offline battles are still found at these little robot-led stations too. While I'd love to go on an opposite day rant, unfortunately I couldn't find an online match against another player even on the weekend. Maybe I just tried at bad times because there were plenty of people running around the hub area. Speaking of the hub area, I forgot to mention that the hub area has a few extras that I would consider side quests. These areas include Majin Buu's house, the Capsule Corporation, and Hercule's dojo. Some of these places have extra training missions depending on your race, like learning the Super Saiyan ability from Vegeta in the Capsule Corporation. Others are outright extra side quests, like the Majin Buu quest where you feed him candy to make babies? Yeah, okay, hold on, let me talk about this for a second. There's a whole side quest where you feed Majin Buu to make babies. You're then feeding his babies so they can go out and do things? Now, does that make you the other parent? Is that how that works? There's some implications here that I think this game isn't covering. Anyway, swiftly moving on, there are also other quests like this in the other areas. It seems like these quests have an end goal of getting some items to get the alternate story mode ending in this game. There's actually an entire quest line about joining Frieza's army and doing missions for them. Also, sometimes in the hub, a random special event will start where Frieza's army invades Kanton City, and you have to fight them off. It seems completely random and only happened to me a couple of times. I actually have no idea if there are other kinds of similar events, but this is the only one I personally ran into. What I like about this, by the way, is the fact that if you've joined Frieza's army already, Frieza calls you a traitor, which is actually really cool. There's another entirely new gameplay system called Hero Coliseum. In this mode, you go head-to-head with someone else's figures represented by Dragon Ball characters. The game is played in phases and has you setting up your figures optimally on the board to gain stat advantages. Once you've placed your figures, the game transitions to what I'll call the battle phase, and you watch the fight go down. It's a bit more complex than I'm describing, but I didn't really enjoy this mode too much. There's an entire storyline that you can do in this mode, but honestly, I don't think this game was lacking in stuff to do at this point. I was more interested in the more hands-on modes where you just fight other characters with your own fists. And what better way to fight characters than to use cool abilities that you learn from mentors? Yeah, mentors return in this game and they work a little bit differently. You now have a rank that goes from easy to intermediate to advanced to Kai to God to super. Depending on your rank, some mentors will mentor you, while others will outright refuse until you're a higher rank. In order to rank up, you take advancement tests, which are a series of fights with an ever-increasing difficulty floor. There's also a lot more mentors in this game. They all hang around different areas of the hub area area and aren't really hard to find. There's also these extra little mentor missions like delivering milk for Krillin. It's a small side thing, but it's still a little bit of low-key fun. So as I've mentioned, there is a story mode in this game like there was in the last game, and it's weirdly similar to the story mode of the first game. You play every era of Dragon Ball, fixing inconsistencies in history, while Toa and Mira are on your trail. The big difference here, though, is that there's also some new baddies who are pulled out of time, including a brainwashed Bardock. That being said, this story does recycle a lot from the first Xenoverse, including some of the fights, and some of the cutscenes are one-for-one transplanted into this game. I mean, it makes sense because you can't really change Dragon Ball Z's story all that much, but at the same time, I do have to wonder how they'd make a Xenoverse 3 without just retreading this story yet again. Obviously, not everything is recycled though, and there's a bunch of new cutscenes, dialogue, missions, and the game even includes a Resurrection F Golden Frieza mission. There's also an extra story scenario once you've collected some hidden items, but I didn't get to do that in time for this video. This story also seems a lot more lighthearted and goofy than the first, in my opinion, but of course it also has some really emotional moments that I personally really enjoyed, especially the future Gohan stuff. I think my favorite thing about this story overall is that it gets kind of meta, and even has you revisiting the original story stuff that happened in the first Xenoverse game, like making sure Trunks is able to summon your Xenoverse 1 character using Shenron. Speaking of, your Xenoverse 1 character is actually brought over as a character into this game, which is super cool in my opinion. Outside of the story and extra stuff I've already mentioned, there's a bunch of stuff both brought over from Xenoverse and new to this game that you can do. For starters, all of the shops are back, including the mixing shop, but there's now another mixing shop called Clothing Mixing, where you can take two kinds of gear and mix them together to create a new item called a QQ Bang. QQ Bangs kinda sorta address my complaint about the gear system from the last game, because what they do is replace all of the stats of the clothes that you're wearing with predefined stats depending on the quality of the QQ Bang. While this isn't a perfect solution, I do think it's better that there's at least the option to wear whatever you want without sacrificing your stats. Another new shop is the TP Metal Shop. As you play through the game, doing optional and side stuff usually awards you with these things called TP medals. These can be used to buy items from a live rotating shop, and the items actually seem to be a bit more lucrative than the normal shops, with stuff like mascot companions, which I couldn't afford, and loading screen wallpapers. I didn't know where to say this, so I'll just say it real quick. If you collect all 7 Dragon Balls through playing missions and parallel quests, you can summon Shenron to wish for things including money, changing your character's look, items, and even playable characters. I used my first wish to unlock a playable character, and that ended up being hit. Also, this game is still getting support in that there are raid missions and online events to this day, not even counting the DLC that's still coming out. You can check the upcoming or previous raids at the newsstand in the game. Another one of the live events includes the World Tournament mode. While I normally would love to talk about this mode, I guess the tournaments are on specific days? I completely missed it when I was playing. I could have waited, but it looks like they're only on the weekends, and I definitely didn't want to wait another whole week to try it. There's also a battle mode that you can play offline or online like in the first game, but I'll go into a bit more detail here. Offline, you can choose between free battle, offline battle, and training. Free battle is a battle between you and a CPU with 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, and 3 versus 3 options. Local battle is an offline split-screen battle mode with up to 2 players. Online battles, you can choose to play a player match, a ranked match, or an endless battle. The player match is a casual match with no stakes. When you select player match, you can choose to play with or without limitations. The limitations basically making it so all of the characters are mostly the same power level without the extra customizations. While I'd love to go into a rant about Opposite Day, again, I couldn't actually find any matches in this game either. I even went as far as to making a room and waiting like 20 minutes 3 separate times, and no one joined. I think I was on at non-peak hours or something, because there's plenty of real players running around in the hub area, but there's also so much to do in this game that they may have just been doing literally anything else. Speaking of, something that I enjoyed about this game significantly more than the first Xenoverse that I really want to put a focus on is how much less bare bones this game feels. The first Xenoverse was by no means lacking in features, but this game just builds on so much while still retaining the framework of the first game. It's what I'd consider the perfect sequel. In fact, it almost makes the first game redundant in my opinion, which is the main reason I skimmed over the first game a little bit. They actually added a DLC just last month that is literally just the entirety of the first game's story. There's really not a whole lot of reason to go back to the first Xenoverse in my opinion, outside of either curiosity or just plain nostalgia. I'm sure there's people out there that prefer the way the first Xenoverse game plays, but I don't imagine that's true for the vast majority of players. Of course, I also have to mention the negative. Well, negative depending on your tastes. This game has a lot of DLC. Like, more than I think anyone ever expected. While it's awesome that there's new characters, parallel quests, costumes, etc., it seems almost like this is the reason the game won't get a sequel, at least not anytime soon. Keep in mind that this game came out in 2016, and the most recent DLC as of this video was last month. month, which for future viewers is July 2022, 6 years later. The cool part though is that basically anyone you can imagine from Dragon Ball has representation here, but the downside is that getting it all can be kind of expensive. In fact, I only own a couple of the DLCs because of just how expensive it is to buy them all. I'll probably pick the rest of them up on sale or something someday, but even then, part of me doesn't want to buy them because what if they announce a Xenoverse 3 soon? Do you see my predicament? In fact, this game kinda suffers from the Super Smash Bros. Problem where everyone's in this game. How can they top this in a future game? Will there be a future game? I know people want a future game, but how would they do it, especially without retreading the story mode again? I'm getting off topic, but I do think it's worth talking about. So anyways, I'm sure that there's stuff that I've missed here in this game. In fact, I'd love to know in the comments if there are any features that you know of that I missed, outside of the ones that I just couldn't play that I already mentioned. So please, let me know in the comments. But there is just so much to do in this game. I actually kind of got lost in it when I was playing to get footage for this video. I mean, it's not like 500 hours of content in a massive AAA RPG, but it's still a hefty package with constant live events going on to this day. To put my thoughts about this game concisely, Xenoverse 2 is a fantastic game with a ton of content. It really is the whole package, and it's a lot of fun to play. It's probably the most content we've ever gotten out of a Dragon Ball game ever, and that's before you consider the DLC. While it's not perfect, it definitely is worth picking up if you're a big or even just a passive fan of Dragon Ball. It also goes on sale a lot, so keep an eye out if you're interested. While the combat in these games isn't the deepest combat, especially since it's an arena fighter, it's still mindless fun with cool effects, and that's exactly what this game aims to be, and it nails that. Here's the surprise third game. Dragon Ball Online was released exclusively for PC and exclusively in Asian territories in 2010 and 2011. It was subsequently shut down in 2013. To my knowledge, this game was the introduction to the Time Patrol and a few of the characters we see in the Xenoverse games. This includes Towa and Mira and Time Patrol Future Trunks. The character you control is from the year 1000 and is sucked back in time by an evil force led by Mira. At least, that's what I can glean from the cutscenes and stuff I've read about the story online. So before I fully get into this, I do need to preface this by saying that the version of the game that I'm playing is a fan-run private server. That means that not only was it translated into English by fans, and seemingly some kind of machine translation, it could also have changes under the hood that make it a different experience from how it was in the original official version. While the gameplay does look like it's true to the source material, I can't guarantee that the people running this version didn't change anything. What I'll be describing here is the state of this version of the game. So, for starters, like any MMO, you make your character. The options are human, Namekian, or Majin. Every race also has a couple of classes to choose from. For example, humans have martial artist or spiritualist. I picked a human martial artist character. What's interesting is that every character starts out as a child, only to age around level 30. Unfortunately, I did not get that far. So I made my character and I was sent to the Kame house to do the in-game tutorial. After that, I started? I ran around, did a bunch of fetch quests, killed a bunch of creatures, you know, MMO stuff. So listen, I have to be blunt about this one. This game is, in its bare essence, as MMO gets. It's got all the trappings of a standard MMO and doesn't really do a whole lot to set itself apart from other games, aside from having a Dragon Ball theme. It doesn't really help that there's not a whole lot of people online, which makes the world feel dead. While that's not surprising by any means, it's kind of hard to ignore how empty the world feels without any players. That's not really the game's fault though, but it is still worth pointing out. A couple of things I did want to highlight about this game though. It actually does something unique in that you can actually activate a little cell shading filter for your character. It also does a pretty good job of nailing that Dragon Ball aesthetic, especially in the city environments. Something interesting that you can run into are these little time rift things that send you to important events in Dragon Ball history, like Goku landing on Earth and Grandpa Gohan finding him. Seeing this kind of thing is actually pretty neat and definitely shows where Xenoverse got a lot of its inspiration. In fact, I wish Xenoverse covered more of the original Dragon Ball stuff, but that's about where my praise for this game ends, unfortunately. Visually, this game is just so bland. Everything looks the same. The outside environments in the early game are just plains littered with some trees. Would you believe that this and this are two completely different zones? Of course, there are some varied environments later on if the gameplay videos I've seen online are any indication, but the beginning of this game is just, I mean, I can't think of a better word than just bland. I spent a few hours playing this and most of the quests were about what you'd expect. Mainly just fetch X number of items or defeat X number of squishy enemies. The coolest thing I encountered was definitely that Grandpa Gohan time Time Rift though. Another complaint I have is the ridiculously limited inventory space. You have a default of 16 slots of inventory space. This can be upgraded by picking up extra inventory capsules, but it seems like they're paid, time-limited items? Either way, 16 slots seems like a lot, maybe, but the game gives you some starting items that fill up some of those slots right off the bat. I ended up having to sell some gear that I wanted to equip when I leveled up because I wasn't able to pick anything else up. Listen, I try not to be overly negative on my channel because I think every game at their core has redeeming qualities, and the same goes for this game. I don't hate this game, it just wasn't for me. If you like MMOs and Dragon Ball, you'll probably like this, at least on a surface level. It has stuff like flying and vehicles and cool Dragon Ball martial arts and energy moves, and it has some fun references and throwbacks to Dragon Ball's history. It just doesn't have a whole lot more than that to offer, at least not early on. It just feels a bit generic to me, but if you're really looking for a Dragon Ball MMO, it seems to be the closest thing you can get, since the newer Dragon Ball MMO, called Time and Space Legend, or Legend of Time and Space, seems to be in some kind of development hell from what I can tell. I don't want to completely write this game off because it may be significantly more fun and varied later on, but naturally my opinion is going to be formed by my experience with the first few hours of the game. Anyways, I think my personal tastes led to me not really being able to get into and fully enjoy this game, but if you're curious, I do recommend giving it a shot yourself and forming your own opinion on it. If you're interested in the private server I used, it's called Dragon Ball Online Global. This isn't an endorsement, I'm just letting you know which one I used to try this game. I always feel sketchy downloading private servers because they can have malware, and while this one didn't set off any red flags for me, there were some very similarly named websites that were clearly scams, so definitely be careful if this is something you want to try. And that's it for the Dragon Ball Xenoverse games. I really enjoyed coming back to the Dragon Ball games, and I definitely plan to continue covering more of them in the future. While the next video probably won't be Dragon Ball, it will be something that a lot of people have requested, and it's long overdue, so definitely keep an eye out. Anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.